In a galaxy filled with countless civilizations, humanity was often seen as an afterthought. Among the stars, there were species that had mastered technology so advanced it seemed like magic. There were beings who lived for centuries, their wisdom stretching across generations. And then there were human short-lived, chaotic, and emotional creatures who barely managed to claw their way into space. To many aliens, Earth and its people were little more than a curiosity, a primitive race struggling to keep up with the rest of the universe. Kale Varn, a xenobiologist from the planet Zanara, was one of those who looked down on humanity. Kale was not just any scientist. He was famous throughout the galaxy for his sharp tongue and cutting critiques of what he called lesser species. He traveled from world to world, giving lectures about how certain races failed to meet the standards of galactic civilization. Of all the species he studied, Kale reserved his harshest words for humans. To him, they were a cosmic joke, a random accident of evolution that somehow stumbled into the interstellar community on this particular day. Kale found himself aboard Eridanus 7, a massive orbital station used by various alien armies for training exercises. The station buzzed with activity as thousands of soldiers from different planets gathered for drills and simulations. It was the perfect audience for Kale's latest speech. As he stepped onto the stage of the auditorium, the room fell silent. 5,000 pairs of eyes turned to look at him, anticipation hanging thick in the air. Kale stood tall, his sleek silver robes shimmering under the lights. His elongated fingers gestured dramatically as he began to speak. "Today," he said, his voice smooth but dripping with disdain, "I want to talk about a species that has baffled me for years. A species whose very existence seems to mock the concept of progress. Ladies and gentlemen, I am speaking, of course, about humanity." The crowd chuckled, some nodding in agreement. Kale smiled faintly, encouraged by their reaction. "Let us consider their history," he continued. "Wars upon wars, fueled by greed and hatred. Entire ecosystems destroyed because they could not control their appetites. Emotions ruling over reason, leading them to make decisions no logical being would ever contemplate. And yet, here they are, claiming their place among the stars." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "What is it that makes humanity think they belong here? Is it their short lifespans? Their inability to unite even within their own kind? Or perhaps it is their constant need to cling to hope, despite overwhelming evidence that they are doomed to fail?" The audience laughed again, clearly enjoying Kale's performance. For many of them, his words confirmed what they already believed, that humans were weak, foolish, and unworthy of respect. But while most of the soldiers laughed, a few faces remained still. Among them was Ryan Carter, a young human soldier stationed on Eridanus 7. Ryan sat near the back of the auditorium, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He didn't laugh or cheer. Instead, he listened intently, his jaw tightening with each insult. Ryan came from Gethin Prime, a harsh colony world known as a death world due to its extreme conditions. Life on Gethin Prime was brutal. Massive storms swept across the surface without warning, tearing apart anything that wasn't built to withstand their fury. Predatory creatures roamed freely, preying on anyone careless enough to venture outside. Alone, resources were scarce, forcing settlers to work together to survive. Growing up in such an environment shaped Ryan into someone who understood hardship better than most. Despite the challenges, Ryan loved his home. To him, Gethin Prime wasn't just a dangerous place, it was a testament to human resilience. Every time a storm hit, every time food ran low, the colonists banded together to rebuild and start anew. They argued, they fought, but when it mattered most, they stood side by side. That spirit of perseverance was something Ryan carried with him wherever he went, including his current posting on ERIDA US-7. As Kale's lecture dragged on, Ryan felt a growing sense of frustration. The aliens' words weren't just insults, they were lies. Lies born out of ignorance and arrogance. Kale spoke of humanity's flaws as though they were unique to humans, ignoring the fact that every species had its weaknesses. What set humans apart wasn't their failures. It was their refusal to stay down when knocked over. When the Q&A session began, Ryan hesitated for a moment. He wasn't the type to draw attention to himself, preferring to let his actions speak louder than his words, but something inside him snapped. Maybe it was the condescending tone in Cale's voice, or maybe it was the laughter echoing through the auditorium. Whatever it was, Ryan decided he couldn't stay silent any longer. Slowly, he raised his hand. At first, the moderator ignored him, focusing instead on the questions coming from more prominent members of the audience. But Ryan persisted, keeping his hand raised until finally, reluctantly, the moderator acknowledged him. "Yes, you in the back," the moderator said. Pointing vaguely in Ryan's direction, Ryan stood up, his posture relaxed but confident. Though he was dressed in the same plain uniform as the other soldiers, there was something about him that made people take notice. Perhaps it was the calmness in his expression or the intensity in his gaze. Either way, as Ryan stepped forward, the room grew quieter. "Mr. Varn," Ryan began, his voice steady and clear, "you've spent a lot of time talking about how primitive we are. You mentioned our wars, our emotions, and our lack of unity. But I'm curious, do you really understand why we fight? Not just against each other, but against everything else?" Cale raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "Go on," he said, folding his arms across his chest. Ryan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I come from a place called Gethin Prime," he explained. "It's a death world, one of the toughest places in the galaxy to live. We deal with hurricanes strong enough to rip apart buildings, predators that can kill in seconds, and food shortages that leave us starving for weeks. Yet somehow we survive. Not because we're stronger or smarter than anyone else, but because we refuse to give up." The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react. Some glanced at Cale, waiting for him to dismiss Ryan's comments as irrelevant. Others leaned forward slightly, curious to hear more. "But let me ask you this," Ryan continued, his tone sharpening. "If we're such a joke, then why do we keep surviving? Why does humanity thrive even in places like my home, where no other species could last a day? Is it because we're weak, or is it because we refuse to give up?" Cale smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Survival isn't proof of superiority," he replied dismissively. "It's merely luck mixed with stubbornness. Your kind clings to existence, like barnacles on a ship's hull. That doesn't make you admirable, it makes you pests." Ryan didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly, almost as if he had expected the response. "Then let me show you what happens when a pest decides to bite back," he said calmly. Before launching into a detailed explanation of humanity's greatest strength, adaptability. As Ryan spoke, the atmosphere in the auditorium changed. The laughter faded, replaced by murmurs of interest. Even Cale, who prided himself on his intellectual superiority, found himself listening more closely than he cared to admit. Ryan's words painted a picture of humanity that was far more complex and far more compelling than the caricature Cale had presented earlier. By the time Ryan finished speaking, the room was eerily quiet. No one clapped, but no one laughed either. For the first time in his career, Cale Varn found himself facing an opponent he hadn't anticipated. And though he tried to brush off Ryan's arguments as naive idealism, a small part of him wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about humanity all along. When Ryan Carter stood up in the auditorium, no one expected much from him. To most of the soldiers present, he was just another human, a small figure among thousands, easily overlooked. But as Ryan began to speak, something shifted. His voice carried a quiet confidence that demanded attention. He didn't shout or raise his tone. Instead, he spoke calmly, choosing each word with care. The more he talked, the more people leaned forward, drawn in by the clarity and conviction in his voice. Ryan started by addressing Cale Varn directly. "Mr. Varn," he said, looking straight at the alien scientist, "you've spent a lot of time talking about how primitive we humans are. You mentioned our wars, our emotions, and our lack of unity. But I'm curious, do you really understand why we fight? Not just against each other, but against everything else?" Cale raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. He had faced critics before, but none had dared challenge him during one of his lectures. "Go on," he said, folding his arms across his chest, his expression smug. Ryan took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew this moment mattered not just for him, but for everyone listening. "I come from a place called Geffen Prime." He began, his voice steady. "It's a death world, one of the toughest places in the galaxy to live. We deal with hurricanes strong enough to rip apart buildings, predators that can kill in seconds, and food shortages that leave us starving for weeks. Yet somehow we survive. Not because we're stronger or smarter than anyone else, but because we refuse to give up." The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react. Some glanced at Cale, waiting for him to dismiss Ryan's comments as irrelevant. Others leaned forward slightly, curious to hear more. Ryan noticed their reactions, but didn't let it distract him. He continued, painting a vivid picture of life on Geffen Prime. "Imagine waking up every morning knowing that the storm outside might destroy your home. Imagine sending your children out to gather food, knowing there's a chance they won't come back. That's what life is like where I'm from. And yet, we keep going. We rebuild our homes after every storm. We teach our kids how to hunt and survive. We work together, even when we disagree, because we know that alone, none of us would make it." As Ryan spoke, his words began to resonate with some of the soldiers in the crowd. They came from different planets, different cultures, but many of them understood struggle. They knew what it meant to face challenges head-on, to push through pain and fear. Ryan's description of life on Geffen Prime struck a chord with them, forcing them to see humanity in a new light. "But let me ask you this," Ryan continued, his tone sharpening. "If we're such a joke, then why do we keep surviving? Why? Does humanity thrive even in places like my home where no other species could last a day? Is it because we're weak, or is it because we refuse to give up?" Cale smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Survival isn't proof of superiority," he replied dismissively. "It's merely luck mixed with stubbornness. Your kind clings to existence like barnacles on a ship's hull. That doesn't make you admirable, it makes you pests." Ryan didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly, almost as if he had expected the response. "Then let me show you what happens when a pest decides to bite back," he said calmly. Before launching into a detailed explanation of humanity's greatest strength, adaptability, he began by describing Earth's history, focusing on moments when humanity had faced seemingly insurmountable odds. "Think about it," Ryan said, pacing slowly now. "For most of our existence, we were nothing special. We didn't have claws or sharp teeth. We weren't the fastest runners or the strongest fighters, but we had something else, brains. We learned to use tools, to create fire, to build shelters. When the environment changed, we adapted. When resources ran low, we found new ways to survive." Ryan paused, letting his words sink in. Then he gestured toward the diverse crowd of soldiers. "Look around you. Every species here has its strengths, but tell me this, which of them could endure what my people endure daily? Which of them could laugh while staring death in the face, knowing they might lose everything tomorrow but still choosing to hope?" Cale opened his mouth to respond, but Ryan cut him off. "And don't think I'm just talking about physical endurance. Our real power lies in connection, in the bonds we form with each other. We may argue, we may hate, but when push comes to shove, we stand together. That's why we survived extinction events, plagues, and wars. That's why we'll always find a way." By now, the audience was listening intently. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uneasy, as if seeing humanity in a new light. Cale, however, remained unconvinced, or so he claimed. "Interesting rhetoric," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But words mean little without proof. Can you back up these grand claims of yours, or are you simply blowing smoke?" Ryan's smile widened slightly. "I thought you'd never ask," he said, stepping closer to the stage. "If you want proof, let's put it to the test. Let's see how humanity performs under pressure. Challenge us, Mr. Varn. Give us a problem to solve and watch what happens." Cale hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by Ryan's boldness. He hadn't expected the human to call his bluff so confidently. But then a sly grin spread across his face. "Very well," he said, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "Let's see if your precious resilience holds up under pressure. I propose a simulation, a tactical exercise involving all 5,000 soldiers here today. If you can lead them to victory using only your so-called ingenuity, I'll admit you might have a point. But if you fail, you'll publicly acknowledge that. Humanity is exactly what I say it is, unworthy of respect." The crowd murmured excitedly. Tactical simulations were common training tools designed to mimic real combat scenarios. They required strategic thinking, teamwork, and quick decision-making, all areas where Kale assumed humans would falter. Ryan accepted the challenge without hesitation, earning cheers from the few humans present. "You've got yourself a deal," Ryan said, extending his hand. Kale shook it reluctantly, his confidence unwavering. He was certain that Ryan's team would crumble under the complexity of the mission. After all, how could a chaotic, emotional species like humanity possibly succeed where others had failed? "What?" followed shocked everyone. The simulation took place in a virtual environment modeled after a dense jungle planet. Teams of soldiers had to navigate treacherous terrain, locate hidden objectives, and neutralize enemy forces controlled by AI. Kale watched smugly from the observation deck, confident that Ryan's team would collapse under the pressure, but Ryan had other plans. From the start, he approached the challenge differently than anyone expected. Instead of relying on traditional hierarchies, he divided the soldiers into small, flexible units, assigning roles based on individual strengths rather than rank. He encouraged open communication, allowing soldiers to share ideas freely. When unexpected obstacles arose, Ryan adapted quickly, improvising solutions that defied conventional tactics. Most importantly, he inspired trust, reminding the troops that failure wasn't an option, not because of pride, but because giving up wasn't in their nature. Hours later, the simulation ended with Ryan's team achieving total victory. The soldiers erupted into applause, chanting Ryan's name. For the first time, Kale found himself speechless. His carefully constructed theories about humanity's inferiority had been shattered, not by brute force but by creativity, teamwork, and sheer determination. As the crowd celebrated, Ryan turned to Kale. "So," he said, his tone polite but firm, "what do you think now?" Kale stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "I underestimated you," he admitted, "and perhaps I underestimated your entire species." Ryan nodded, satisfied but not gloating. "We're not perfect," he said simply. "Far from it, but maybe that's the point. Perfection is static. Humanity is alive, messy, flawed, and unpredictable. And that's what makes us dangerous." With that, Ryan walked away, leaving Kale to reflect on the lesson he had just learned. For the first time in his career, the xenobiologist realized that perhaps humanity wasn't the galaxy's joke after all. Maybe, just maybe, they were something far greater. The simulation began with a tense silence. 5,000 soldiers from different planets and species stood ready, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of holographic displays. The virtual jungle stretched out before them, dense and foreboding, filled with towering trees, murky swamps, and hidden dangers. It was designed to test every aspect of military strategy, communication, adaptability, teamwork, and leadership. For most of the soldiers present, it was just another training exercise. But for Ryan Carter, it was something more, a chance to prove that humanity wasn't the laughingstock Kale Varn claimed it to be. As soon as the countdown ended, chaos erupted. The AI-controlled enemies launched an ambush, sending waves of drones and robotic units crashing through the underbrush. Soldiers scrambled to take cover, shouting orders and firing blindly into the foliage. Confusion spread quickly, especially among the larger groups that relied on rigid hierarchies. Commanders barked conflicting instructions, while lower-ranking troops hesitated, unsure whom to follow. Within minutes, several squads had fallen apart entirely. Their members scattered or overwhelmed. Ryan watched all of this unfold from his position near the edge of the battlefield. He didn't rush in like the others. Instead, he took a moment to observe, analyzing the situation carefully. His calm demeanor stood out sharply against the panic around him. When he finally moved, it wasn't to join the largest group or take charge of the entire operation. Instead, he focused on the soldiers closest to him, a mix of humans and aliens who had been separated from their original teams. "Listen up," Ryan said, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the din. "We don't have time to argue about ranks or protocols. If we want to survive, we need to work together. Does anyone here know how to disable those drones?" A young alien with iridescent skin raised her hand tentatively. "I've studied their technology," she admitted. "But I've never done it myself," Ryan nodded. "Good enough. You're with me. What about the rest of you? Any snipers? Medics? Engineers?" The soldiers exchanged glances, surprised by Ryan's direct approach. Slowly, they began to step forward, volunteering their skills. A burly reptilian soldier offered his strength for close combat, while a wiry human with quick reflexes volunteered to scout ahead. By the time Ryan finished organizing them, the group had transformed into a cohesive unit. Each member assigned a role based on their strengths. "All right," Ryan said, clapping his hands together. "Here's the plan. We'll split into pairs or small teams. Each team will focus on one objective: taking out enemy patrols, securing supply caches, or disabling traps. Stay in constant contact using your comms. If you run into trouble, fall back and regroup. Got it?" The soldiers nodded, their expressions shifting from uncertainty to determination. They might not have trusted Ryan at first, but his clear thinking and confidence inspired them to try. As they dispersed, Ryan turned his attention to the next group of stragglers nearby. He repeated the process, forming another flexible unit tailored to the individuals involved. Within an hour, Ryan had organized dozens of such teams, spreading across the jungle like a network of interconnected nodes from the observation deck high above. Cale Varn watched everything unfold. At first, he smirked, convinced that Ryan's unorthodox methods would lead to disaster. Traditional military doctrine emphasized strict chains of command and uniform tactics. Breaking away from that structure seemed reckless, even foolish. Yet as the simulation progressed, Cale found himself frowning. Despite the initial chaos, Ryan's teams were achieving results. Small victories began to add up: a disabled drone here, a captured supply cache there. Communication lines remained open, allowing information to flow freely between groups. Most impressively, no single failure brought the entire operation crashing down. If one team faltered, others stepped in to pick up the slack. Cale leaned forward, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "This shouldn't be working," he muttered to himself. "It defies logic." Down on the battlefield, Ryan continued to adapt. When the AI introduced new obstacles, collapsing bridges, sudden weather changes, or ambush from unexpected directions, he adjusted his strategies on the fly. He encouraged his soldiers to think creatively, rewarding initiative rather than punishing mistakes. If someone came up with a risky but effective solution, Ryan praised them openly, boosting morale. Over time, the soldiers began to trust not only Ryan but also each other. Bonds formed quickly, transcending species and language. Barriers. One particularly tense moment came when a large patrol of enemy units cornered a group of soldiers near a swamp. Outnumbered and outgunned, the trapped team sent out a distress signal. Without hesitation, 3 nearby teams converged on the location, coordinating their movements via comms. One team created a diversion, drawing the enemy's attention away from the swamp. Another set up a perimeter, providing covering fire. The third swooped in silently, rescuing the stranded soldiers and retreating before the AI could counterattack. When the dust settled, the rescued soldiers thanked their rescuers profusely. "How did you know we were in trouble?" one of them asked. "We heard your call," replied a human soldier with a grin. "And besides, that's what Ryan taught us, to look out for each other." Word of the rescue spread quickly, further solidifying Ryan's reputation as a leader. Soldiers who had initially doubted him now looked to him for guidance. Even non-human troops, who often viewed humans as weak or unreliable, began to see them in a new light. Ryan's emphasis on teamwork and adaptability resonated deeply. reminding everyone of the importance of cooperation in the face of adversity. As the hours passed, the tide of the battle shifted decisively in Ryan's favor. Enemy forces were whittled down piece by piece, unable to withstand the relentless pressure applied by his decentralized network of teams. Morale soared among the soldiers, fueling their determination to succeed. By the time the final objective, a heavily fortified enemy base, came into view, Ryan's army was functioning like a well-oiled machine. "This is it," Ryan said, addressing the assembled troops. "The last push. We've come too far too. Fail now, stick to the plan, watch each other's backs, and remember why we're here. Let's show them what we're made of." With that, the soldiers charged forward, their movements coordinated and precise. The AI threw everything it had at them: waves of drones, automated turrets, and even environmental hazards, but nothing could stop the momentum Ryan had built. One by one, the defenses fell, until finally the base was secured. A cheer erupted from the victorious troops, echoing through the virtual jungle. Back on the observation deck, Kale sat in stunned silence. He had expected Ryan's chaotic approach to collapse under its own weight. Instead, it had triumphed spectacularly. For the first time in his life, Kale felt genuinely humbled. Humanity wasn't the primitive, disorganized species he had always dismissed. They were resourceful, resilient, and capable of achieving greatness when given the chance. When the simulation ended, the soldiers gathered in the auditorium once again. This time, however, the atmosphere was electric. Cheers and applause filled the room as Ryan stepped onto the stage. He didn't bask in the attention, though. Instead, he turned to Kale, who had joined him reluctantly. "So," Ryan said, his tone polite but firm, "what do you think now?" Kale hesitated, searching for the right words. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "I underestimated you," he admitted. "And perhaps I underestimated your entire species." Ryan nodded, satisfied but not gloating. "We're not perfect," he said simply. "Far from it, but maybe that's the point. Perfection is static. Humanity is alive, messy, flawed, and unpredictable, and that's what makes us dangerous." With that, Ryan walked away, leaving Kale to reflect on the lesson he had just learned. For the first time in his career, the xenobiologist realized that perhaps humanity wasn't the galaxy's joke after all. Maybe, just maybe, they were something far greater. The auditorium buzzed with energy as the soldiers filed back in, their faces glowing with pride and excitement. The simulation had ended, but its impact lingered. For many of them, it wasn't just a victory, it was proof that they could overcome challenges together, no matter how impossible things seemed at first. Ryan Carter stood quietly near the stage, his expression calm despite the chaos around him. He didn't seek the spotlight, but it found him anyway. Soldiers from different planets and species approached him, congratulating him on his leadership and thanking him for inspiring them. Kale Varn watched all of this from the sidelines, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His usual smug demeanor was gone, replaced by an uneasy look of reflection. He had spent years mocking humanity, dismissing them as weak and unworthy. Yet here he was, witnessing firsthand what humans were truly capable of. It was unsettling, to say the least. Finally, Kale stepped forward, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. The room quieted down quickly, the soldiers turning to face him. "Before we conclude," Kale began, his voice steady but lacking its usual arrogance, "I want to address something. Earlier today, I made certain claims about humanity, claims I now realize may have been misguided." A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one expected Kale to admit he was wrong, especially not publicly. Ryan raised an eyebrow, intrigued, but cautious. He knew better than to celebrate too soon. "I underestimated you," Kale continued, glancing at Ryan briefly before addressing the entire audience. "I judged humanity based on stereotypes and assumptions without truly understanding your strengths. Today's simulation proved me wrong. Your adaptability, your teamwork, your refusal to give up even when faced with overwhelming odds, these are qualities that deserve respect." The soldiers exchanged surprised looks. Some clapped softly while others simply nodded, acknowledging Cale's words. Ryan remained silent, letting the moment sink in. He didn't need to say anything. Cale's admission spoke volumes. After the applause died down, Cale turned to Ryan directly. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone softer than before, "may I speak with you privately?" Ryan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course," he replied, following Cale out of the auditorium and into a nearby conference room. Once the door closed behind them, Cale gestured for Ryan to sit. The alien scientist paced slowly, clearly struggling to put his thoughts into words. "I've dedicated my life to studying lesser species." Cale began, his voice tinged with frustration. "I thought I understood you humans, your flaws, your weaknesses. But today I saw something I can't explain. How do you do it? How do you keep going even when everything seems hopeless?" Ryan leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. "It's not complicated," he said after a pause. "We don't have a choice. On worlds like mine, giving up means dying, so we learn to adapt. We find ways to survive, even if it means breaking the rules or trying something crazy. And yeah, sometimes we fail. But failure doesn't scare us. What scares us is standing still." Cale frowned, processing Ryan's answer. "But isn't that inefficient? Constantly reinventing yourselves, making mistakes, it sounds chaotic." "It is chaotic," Ryan admitted with a small smile. "But that's the thing. Chaos gives us room to grow. Other species might be more advanced or organized, but they're also stuck in their ways. They follow patterns, stick to what works. Humans, we're messy, sure, but we're also unpredictable. When the old solutions stop working, we come up with new ones. That's our edge." Cale stopped pacing, staring at Ryan intently. "And this connection you spoke of earlier, the bonds between your people, is that really so important?" Ryan nodded. "Absolutely. You can have the best tools, the smartest plans, but none of it matters if you don't trust the person next to you. On Gethin Prime, we rely on each other because we have to. It's not about being perfect. It's about being there for one another, even when it's hard." For a long moment, Cale was silent. Then he sighed, running a hand over his elongated face. "I've spent decades looking down on humanity, convinced you were nothing more than a cosmic accident. But now," he trailed off, shaking his head, "now I see I was wrong, perhaps dangerously so." Ryan tilted his head slightly, curious. "Dangerously?" Cale nodded. "If humanity's greatest strength lies in its unpredictability, then underestimating you could be catastrophic not just for me, but for any species that crosses your path. You're not just survivors, Mr. Carter, you're innovators, fighters, and dreamers. Combined, those traits make you formidable." Ryan chuckled softly, leaning forward. Cale's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ryan sat quietly, letting them settle. He could see the change in Cale, the way his shoulders slumped slightly, as if carrying the weight of his newfound understanding. For someone who had spent his life criticizing others, admitting fault wasn't easy, but Ryan respected that. It took courage to acknowledge when you were wrong, especially in front of thousands of people. "You're not the first to underestimate us," Ryan said, finally breaking the silence. His tone was calm, almost gentle. "And you won't be the last. But here's the thing about humanity, we don't hold grudges." "Not really. Sure, we get angry, and sometimes we fight back, but deep down we just want to move forward. We're always looking for a way to make things better." Cale nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "That's admirable," he admitted. "Most species would seek revenge after being mocked and dismissed for so long. Yet here you are, offering insight instead of bitterness." Ryan shrugged. "What good would revenge do? It doesn't solve anything. Besides, I'm not speaking just for myself, I'm speaking for all of us. Humanity isn't perfect, far from it, but we're trying, and maybe that's enough." The alien scientist studied Ryan for a moment, his sharp eyes searching for any hint of dishonesty. But all he saw was sincerity. Finally, Cale sighed and straightened up. "I need to rethink my work," he said abruptly. "Everything I've written, every lecture I've given, it's based on flawed assumptions. If I'm going to continue studying lesser species, I owe it to them and to myself to approach it with an open mind. Ryan smiled faintly. But that's a good start. Just remember, we're not lesser, we're different. Every species has its own strengths and weaknesses. The trick is learning from each other instead of judging. Kale nodded again, this time with a hint of determination. I'll begin by revisiting my research on humanity. Maybe I'll even visit Earth someday? See for myself what your world is like? Ryan raised an eyebrow, amused. Just be prepared. Earth isn't exactly paradise. It's messy, crowded, and full of problems, but it's also beautiful in its own way. You might find it overwhelming at first. I'll take that risk, Kale replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. After today, I think I can handle a little chaos. Later that evening, Ryan returned to his quarters on Eridanus 7. The station was quieter now, the excitement of the simulation fading as soldiers went about their routines. Ryan sat on the edge of his bunk, staring out the window at the vast expanse of stars. He felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, relief, and even a touch of sadness. Pride because he had proven humanity's worth. Relief because Kale had finally listened. Sadness because he knew there were still others out there who doubted his kind, who refused to see past their prejudices, but Ryan didn't let himself dwell on those thoughts for long. Instead, he thought about the soldiers he had worked with. During the simulation, the aliens who had once viewed him with suspicion but now treated him as an equal. That was progress, however small. And progress mattered. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, turning to see one of the soldiers standing in the doorway. It was the young alien with iridescent skin, one who had helped disable the drones during the exercise. "Hey," she said shyly, stepping inside. "I just wanted to thank you again, for everything. You showed us what teamwork really means." Ryan smiled warmly. "You did most of the work. I just gave you the chance to shine." She shook her head. "No, it was more than that. You made us believe in ourselves, in each other. I've never been part of something like that before." Ryan stood up, crossing the room to pat her shoulder gently. "That's the power of connection. When you trust the people around you, amazing things happen. Remember that, okay?" She nodded, her glowing skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. "I will. Thanks, Ryan." As she left, Ryan felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why he had joined the military, not for glory or recognition, but to make a difference. To show others that humanity wasn't just another species struggling to survive. They were builders, creators, and dreamers. They carried hope, even in the darkest places. The next morning, news of the simulation spread across the galaxy. Reports highlighted Ryan's leadership and humanity's unexpected victory. Some praised the ingenuity of the human soldier, while others questioned whether Kale Varn's theories were truly valid. Regardless of the opinions, one thing was clear: humanity had earned a new level of respect. Back on Zanara, Kale began rewriting his lectures. He scrapped his old notes, replacing them with observations he had gathered during his encounter with Ryan. His colleagues were skeptical at first, but Kale was undeterred. He knew the truth now, and he intended to share it with anyone willing to listen. For Ryan, life on Eridanus 7 returned to normal, or as normal as it could be. Soldiers greeted him with nods of respect, and some even sought his advice on strategy and teamwork. He didn't let the attention go to his head, though. Instead, he used it as an opportunity to teach others about the values he held dear: adaptability, connection, and resilience. Months passed, and Ryan received word that Kale planned to visit Earth. The xenobiologist sent a message ahead, asking if Ryan would guide him during his stay. Ryan agreed without hesitation, eager to introduce Kale to the planet that had shaped him. From bustling cities to quiet countryside, Kale experienced the full spectrum of human life. He marveled at the diversity, the creativity, and the sheer determination of the people he met. By the end of his trip, Kale was a changed individual. He returned to Zanara with a fresh perspective, dedicating his work to bridging the gap between species. As for Ryan, he continued serving on Eridanus 7. inspiring those around him with his quiet confidence and unwavering belief in humanity's potential. In the end, the galaxy learned an important lesson: never underestimate the power of a Death Worlder with something to prove.